Welcome to another episode of Tomes and Tunes. What episode is this? 56. Episode 56. 56 fun weeks of talking with songwriters from around the world. And we talk about the creative process and all kinds of things, and also books, because that is one of my favorite things, along with music. And then we do a couple of song swap things at the end, which is really fun. So episode 56, my gosh, already summertime. We are getting into a heat wave here in Los Angeles. So I have a little whirly fan down here at my feet. Maybe I'll turn it on, but I'm going to see if I can get by without it so it doesn't make any noise on the microphone. And this week I'm very happy to bring on a fellow Angelino, not by birth, but neither am I. He's on the other side of the hill from me and over by the beach. So I'm guessing that he's getting some ocean breezes. I am not. In any case, today's guest is Kevin Kelso. And before I bring him on, I just want you to know that that little ticker tape that's going down below, linktr.ee/ArielleSilver, that's where you can find out more about me. And I am right now in my first month of launching my Patreon. And Patreon is a membership platform. In case you're not familiar with it, it starts at $3 a month and goes all the way up to a gazillion. To fit all levels. But what it is a place where I'm sharing the bootlegs and new song demos and backstories of my songs. I am a working songwriter, and it's a really great place for me to just be able to share with people who are interested in going into a deeper dive of what I'm doing musically and literarily. It's really nice. I just launched it a couple of weeks ago, and I'm in the final 10 days of the first month blast off. And I chose this particular time because on June 26th, I will be celebrating the 1-year anniversary of my fourth album, 1,000 Tiny Torches, which came out last year, obviously. And it took 10 years to make that album. I'm just so proud of it. It's a really wonderful album, and produced it with an amazing team. And I thought, well, what better way to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the release of my the release of my fourth album than by moving forward with new songs for the fifth album. And so this is a way for my community to be a part of that and support it. Anyway, if you're interested in learning more about that, it has a whole planetary theme going on. So for the next 10 days, I'm going to be sharing little factoids about the planets and the solar system over on Instagram, which is really fun. I just love that stuff. I went to space camp. You know, I don't know. There's like some part of me wants to be an astronaut and still does. Now I just gaze at stars and write songs about them. Anyway, so there's that. Also on that link, I'm now playing shows out in the real world. So if you were in Los Angeles or Ojai or up on the Central Coast, I'm going to be in those areas over the next few months, and I would love to see you at a show. So, little plug there, and without further ado, I am bringing on Kevin Kelso. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Hi, Arielle. How are you doing?
I'm good. I hope you don't mind. I put a little advertisement there at the top.
No, not at all.
It's so exciting that things are starting to open up, and I feel it more than like I don't know about you. I was not, pawing at the door. I wasn't jonesing for things to open up prematurely. I was okay to just sit and hunker down and write music and be right here and connect with people through Tomes and Tunes and other ways. I was happy to do that, but now I feel I'm vaccinated. Many, many people in our community in Los Angeles are vaccinated. It's feeling good, right? Is that how you're feeling on the West Side?
Yeah, but I definitely identify with the that idea of having had a kind of a pause that was not a bad thing for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was annoying in many ways, but I sort of enjoyed it. And now I am noticing that I'm a little reluctant to go back out in the world. I feel a little a little reluctance, and I feel like, yeah, it's going to take me some time to get used to. I mean, I'm an introvert, right? So
Yeah,
this
me too.
this was in some ways a kind of a welcome respite for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a little more resistance than I would have expected to just going out and being in the world.
I can 100% relate to that. When I was feeling that, I think, up until a week ago. I'm still feeling some resistance. I'm not shaking people's hands. I've recently encountered a few circumstances where someone put their hand out, and I was like, not there yet. You know, which is awkward. But I think people understand. It's like it's an okay time to sort of state that and be clear on your boundaries. I also I didn't mind I didn't mind the world getting quieter, my world getting quieter for
Mm.
a while. I felt like in that way, not I of course wouldn't have wished for the reason for the
Yeah,
quietude,
of
but
course.
the reason I had no control over that. So just dealing with the quietude itself, it was actually something I'd wished for a long time. It was nice to spend the year,
Mm.
you know, collecting myself, coming to my senses, clarifying my values, all the self-reckoning that happened, I think, for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had a period where it was really hard to write. Because there was a period,
Yes.
I don't know, right about a year ago, maybe a little longer. I had just finished up writing a musical with my friend Hannah Wise, and so
Oh.
we had mostly finished that, and we're doing some kind of tidy up work, and we're planning for a staged reading. And
Mm.
so I was, getting all that organized,
Yeah.
and then it became clear that we just weren't going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so that was a bummer. we
Yeah.
we were we were like, this just, our momentum sort of just stopped, and we did try to
Yeah.
at least do some remote recordings, but I found that very difficult to do, especially with brand new material that you haven't really worked out all the kinks. So
Yeah.
after that sort of kind of slowly stopped. I mean, we were working on it, and then we were, well, let's try to do it remotely, and then that what happened less and less, and then
Yeah.
it just sort of stopped. And then there was a period of time last summer where, on the one hand, I really didn't want to hear anything about COVID.
Mm.
But on the other hand, writing something that wasn't about COVID sort of seemed pointless. Like everything was about COVID.
Yeah.
So, of course, I didn't want any more things about COVID. But yet, if I would just be writing about some other thing, I'd be like, what's the point?
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to get
Yeah.
back around to where I could use the enforced solitude to write. But I joined a writing group in the fall. What got me out of it really was, I was working on a project with Hillary Rollins, but also she sent me some lyrics, and so that was easy for me to sort of work my way into. But I got into a writing group that meets every other week and writes to a prompt. And I'd actually never done this before.
Yeah.
And that gave me a reason to write something. I was like, here's why I need to write something. I'll be embarrassed if on Sunday afternoon I'll have a song.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
going to write
Yeah.
a song. And actually, I was really happy with the work that I was producing, and that kick-started it, and I've been writing pretty steadily since. But I did have that lull period in the summer where it was really just, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that for me, I really love, I love and hate, but a bigger part of me loves, a great part of me hates, a bigger part of me loves writing to a prompt. And the reason I think I have that ambivalence about it is because it forces a constraint, or it forces your mind to hone in on just, it sort of directs your attention. It could be anything, but at least it gives you something to focus on. And sometimes that's just excruciating, and then at some point that it's like a laser focus. When you figure out how you're going to use that prompt, it can just be remarkable. I had the exact same experience last year with COVID in terms of writing. I was writing a lot at the beginning of the year before the pandemic, or at least before it entered my real world. And then, once March hit, I didn't write songs at all for the rest of the year. I did write a lot on assignment for things. I am a contributing writer for Roland, the keyboard maker. They have an online magazine, and I'm a contributing writer. So that sort of stuff. But yeah, I found it very hard to process what was happening in the world and churn it into something that you might call a song or art. But then once the calendar flipped to 2021, like you, I found a accountability partner for writing, and we started using prompts, and it really helped to just start get the gears. I think of it like the faucet. Like at first it's just sludge that comes out, and then it's like, oh, the water starts running clear, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I was pretty late to discover this, but where you and I met on the, because of course we've never
Oh, yeah.
physically met.
That's right.
But
We haven't.
but at the Fiddler's Crossing open mic that we go to, where we first encountered each other. That's actually been a godsend for me. I really
It's
got a
been
lot out of
wonderful.
that. It's a great group of people, and
Yeah.
it gives me a reason to prepare a song to play, prepare
Yeah.
a couple songs to play, and it's kind of got me back in the groove of performing, because again,
Yeah.
I haven't done it in months until then.
Yeah.
I really wish I'd found that 8 months ago, 9 months ago. It would have been great, but I just started in February, so I haven't
Yeah,
been
this
at
is
that yet.
I also started, I started after you. I had just, by the time I found it, you were already part of it. And I, this kind of harkens back to something I was thinking about a lot last year, which is that the role of the audience for the performer. And I feel like it's a lot more complicated than I ever thought before. Back when we would perform on stage, it was just such a familiar setting that I didn't really examine that relationship too much. But in the time of COVID, I started this show, but I also started last year. I was doing every Friday evening, I was doing Arielle's acoustic happy hour, and I would do a live stream of just playing my songs, mostly in some covers. And I thought a lot about the relationship between the audience and the performer during that time, because just like this, I couldn't see the audience, and unlike this, I was the only one on the screen. I couldn't see another performer or another artist. And there's a difference between when you're sitting in your room and you're playing your song over and over and rehearsing it, and then when you are playing a song and you know that someone is listening to it. I have a different relationship with that song. I hear it differently when I
Oh
know
yeah.
that someone else is hearing it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. In fact, I never really finish a song until I'm about to perform it. Like it's really in that rehearsal
Yeah.
process, because now I'm mentally, instead of just like what's the word here, what's the rhyme, what's the chord, I'm in the process of telling in my own mind. I'm visualizing an audience. I'm visualizing. It's not a conscious thing that I do. It's just when I know I'm going to be playing that song on Friday, I start thinking about, and what the first thing that it does is it squelches out my excuses. So I'll have a line that I've never really been happy with, but I figure I'm going to get away with it. And when I'm
Right.
preparing it for performance, then I won't have it. Then
Yeah.
it's like, no, I got to fix that. That's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing it does for me. It forces me to grapple with the little rough edges that I haven't seen off.
Yeah.
But the other thing it does is it causes me to think about telling the story to the person, as opposed to just playing the notes and singing the notes, and so I wind up, like I said, I'll have a song 95% done, but it's not finished until the first performance, and sometimes, obviously, and we've all had this experience. You perform and it doesn't go over the way you thought it would, and
Yeah.
people laugh at the wrong moment or whatever, and you think, okay, so that's not, that line's not working. I got to rethink
Right.
this.
Right. Yeah. I was talking about this just with someone recently, and he was saying, I felt like, I feel like you understand what I'm saying, and I felt like when I was talking to this other person, he was like, wait, so are you overly dependent on whether the audience likes or doesn't like a song? And that's not what it is. It's just that the way that you hear it is different. You can see their attention or their lack of attention, or,
Sure.
or it brings you, it makes you more aware of something that's maybe not quite working. Yeah, you have to just shimmy it into place. Just now when you were describing that, I was thinking about Thanksgiving, which of course we missed last year, and hopefully we'll have, hopefully have this year. But you live in your house all the time, but then when you're having, a lot of company come over, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that pile of books on the table probably doesn't need to be there, and maybe
true.
I should declutter the counter in the kitchen or something like that. It's like you just look at things a little differently when you're conscious of other eyes, and you look at your songs differently when you're conscious of other ears. You start to hear it differently.
Yeah. It's really it's just like also if it's like watching a movie with someone who's never seen it before, like one of your favorite movies, and you see it with fresh eyes. So
Yeah,
I think that's
yeah,
part of what happens for me. But
yeah.
it is distinct, like the process of getting feedback from the audience, whether spoken or just mostly nonverbal. Right, you're just watching and taking in. You're just interacting with them. That's one part of it. But I don't even before that, because once I think I'm going to tell this story to someone, then I work it out.
So
then
this
I
is
actually
interesting what
start
you're
to think
saying,
about
because
it.
you're kind of saying that you don't even need the audience. You just need the belief that you're about to be in front of an audience.
It is. I
Isn't
need
that
to know that's going
interesting?
to happen, and then it's like, oh, okay. Well, I got to get serious now about this. Like that line doesn't really work, and I know it doesn't work, but I won't.
Yeah.
I won't have the impetus to really figure those things out and fix them until I know that's coming.
So
That's kind of
interesting.
weird.
Yeah, but but that's interesting because maybe we can harness our attention, or kind of tell ourselves a story like, oh, I'm going to be playing on Friday, whether or not you're going to be playing on Friday,
Yeah.
But I don't know. There is something there. Yeah,
Well, there is another level. The next level is because one thing that I've
the
noticed
actual
is
people, right?
the actual people are yet another level, and they
Yeah.
affect me in a
Yeah.
way. So my wife, of course, hears all my songs a million times before I ever have played them anywhere. And sometimes she will then say, after she's heard me play it live, oh, I really like that song. I mean, you've played it around the house, and I never really got it. It never really spoke to me. But when you play it in front of people, it came alive. And I'm sure that's just part of the performance dynamic.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like when you're just talking to yourself versus saying something to really articulate it and be understood. And you're not just saying the words, but you're saying the words to have the words understood, or you're singing the
Sure.
song to have the song understood. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. I want to say, I don't know if you can see the chat stream here, but we have a couple of people that have chimed in, and I know that a lot more people are watching and listening. So if you are, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, say hello so that we can see you in the chat. And hi, Susie, nice to see you. Been missing you. And Anne, thank you. Rocketing into new galaxies. Yes. Jude, hello. And I think
Hey,
this
Jude.
is Alana.
Hey, Alan.
Oh,
I think
Alan.
that's Alan.
Okay. Alan, hello. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here. And feel free to participate in the conversation in the chat box as well. You're certainly welcome to. So, Kevin, while we're talking, I also have this sense of an ocean breeze because it is stifling hot here in the valley. I'm in Burbank, and it's so. Just lie to me. Just tell me how wonderful it is by the ocean, and that would be lovely.
It's so wonderful. Although honestly, we have the air conditioning on today.
Oh,
So it's a little toasty here today
Okay.
too, but we do get the ocean breeze, so it's
very nice.
Most
Do
of
you
the time.
ever? Well, you play piano. Shoot, I was going to ask, do you ever bring your guitar down to the beach? But no, you don't. You play piano.
Yeah.
We were talking about this before in the green room, about sort of the way that guitar has become not the only instrument, but the primary instrument in terms of folk music and singer-songwriters and even rock and stuff like that, because it's just portable, and you can bring the instrument down to the ocean. So, what do you do when you're traveling or something like that, when you don't have a piano nearby? Or how often do you even when you're home, how often do you sit down to a piano? What is your writing process like, and how does the instrument itself impact your writing? Because it is a piece of furniture.
Sure. I do. I mean, I do some noodle. I mean, when I travel and I go somewhere, I don't bring a keyboard. I rent one. I go to Guitar Center and I get a keyboard because it's just so much trouble to lug. It's bad enough to lug it, down to the club here, but carrying it with you distances is a whole other thing. But as part of my writing process, I noodle around. I will do, but I'm mostly a lyric first writer. I really tend to. Sometimes I'll have an idea like a hook that's sort of the music and the lyric are sort of together. They're enmeshed, and then I build the song from there. But most of the time, I would say I am writing the lyric, and the music is in my head. And the music that's in my head may or may not be the song as it takes shape. I may write multiple melodies to that particular lyric.
Yeah.
But it's more. It's not. I say lyric first. It's more interactive than that. It's back and forth. Like
it is for
I'll
me
write
too.
a lyric and then I'll go to set it and I'll go, okay, I wish it was shaped like this, and so I'll rework the lyric a little bit to shape it the way I want the melody to work for that part.
Yeah.
And I just go back and forth between those two things, making little adjustments. Sometimes I'll add some syllables in a line. Sometimes I'll say that line's just way too long. I need to chop it in half. How can I say that in 8 words instead of 14?
Yeah. I think for me, songwriting is oftentimes, it's almost like collaging a little bit. Like I put an idea down and then another idea and another idea. And sometimes they're musical and sometimes they're lyrical and sometimes they're conceptual, but I just start to lay them all out on the floor sort of, and then start playing with how they relate to each other, and then discard some ideas that, maybe this is something for another song or who knows what, maybe just push it aside, maybe it'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've never described it this way, but I think that my songwriting process is somewhat like collaging, right? But not
Interesting.
and in fact, I don't think I have a sample here, but I went through a phase a long time ago where I would cut out not pictures from magazines, but colors from magazines, just swaths of color. If someone was wearing a red dress, I wouldn't cut out the red dress, but I would cut out the red, or I would cut out blues of sky so that there was some variation there. And then I would create an entirely different picture from these swatches of color, like that. And I feel like songwriting is a little bit like that.
Yeah. I will have an idea sometimes. I use a similar process sometimes. I'll have an idea, and then I will assemble little thoughts around that. And a lot of times I'll do them on my phone, just in the notes. I'll just make notes about a song, and at some point I'll say, okay, so I think I got critical mass now. It's time to sit down with this and make some sense out of it, and see if I can shape it into a lyric. But having a process is a big change for me. I haven't been a songwriter for my whole life. I actually started writing songs. I think I wrote my first song 10 years ago, and I've always played the piano, but I haven't really written songs until fairly recently. And at first, I wrote songs, and they're songs I still like. I think they work, but a lot of my songwriting time was waiting for lightning to strike.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, as soon as I get a good idea, I'm going to write some stuff down.
Yeah.
And, you can go through a lot of scotch waiting for a good idea that way. So, but I actually took a class in songwriting that turned out to be a great thing to have done with Harriet Schock, who teaches a lot of singer-songwriters in town. And she teaches a process.
Yeah.
And really the whole idea for me of having a process was really valuable. I mean, I wouldn't say that I use her exact process per se. Probably no one does. But I learned some things. But the meta idea of, you can have an idea for a song, and then you don't have to just sit around and wait and hope something clever comes up. You can do concrete things to move you through the process of building up the idea for the song. And I feel like nowadays I can write a song I'm in control. Like I can decide if I want to write a song
It's empowering. Yeah.
about the dog I just saw.
Right.
It's a thing I can decide to do. Now that might not be a great song, but I can get a song to come out, and if it's something I feel really interested in, usually it works out all right.
Well, you mentioned lightning strike, and I think that that's probably how we start. You know, like I, the first time I wrote a song, it was just that sense of, oh, I feel inspired. I want to write this song. And then maybe the second time also, I think that idea is kind of what brings us to the feeling that we enjoyed the process, that we want to do it again. And after we have that waiting around for inspiration strikes and then do it. After that happens enough times, at some point in time, when we want to move from, I guess, the hobbyist to the professional, or just simply want to hone the craft, at some point you're like, yeah, I cannot just go through all that scotch. I have to, like, figure out how to intentionally, since this is something that I intend to do and something that I want to be doing, then I have to figure out how to intentionally do it. And I love what you're saying. Ann Stott over here, hi Ann, in the chat box says, how is the process affected by starting with a prompt? And I like that question because I actually have mapped out my process when it comes to prompts. It doesn't always follow this same thing, but the same process. But especially when I feel stuck, if I have a prompt and I don't feel like I quite know what to do with it, I will just go back to this toolbox and say, okay, start here. And I have sort of a method for when I don't exactly know how to enter a song. It's like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. I actually have it mapped out in my journal. And when I'm stuck, I go back to this map and I'm like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, I really identify with that because it's a question of finding, for me, a lot of times it's like I can't find my way into this song. I think it's going to be a good idea, but I can't find a line into it. And that's, with respect to a prompt, from Ann's question, for me, that's what it boils down to is like, what about that? And it's usually for me, it's what is an unexpected take on that prompt? Like, that's the way my brain works. It doesn't want to do something very obvious, even though something very obvious might be great. It's just not the way my brain works. It wants to find a funny angle. And then once I have that angle, then I can start to work through the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, one of the ways that I'm trying to do this actually, even when I'm not stuck. One of the very, very, very first step, if I'm working with a prompt, is that I will just write the prompt, whatever it might be on the page. I'm trying to remember right now as I'm thinking this through what song I might have done this with recently. Well, in any case, yeah. Oh, actually, right. I'm not going to play this song today, but there's a song that I recently wrote called "Bottle Up Tonight." The prompt was.
Oh, I love that song. That's a great song.
Thank you. The prompt was trash, and I put the word trash on the page, and then numbered 1 through 5, and I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with this prompt. Let me just jot down 5 different ideas. Like, what are some adjacent ideas or related ideas to trash? And I don't know that in that list of 1 through 5, I don't know if I wrote the word raccoon, but I noticed over a couple of days that I started circling back to this idea of raccoons in a trash can. And as it turns out, the song has nothing to do with trash.
Mm-hmm.
It's a song about sort of capturing a moment in time. It's sort of a love song for perhaps a person, but perhaps just for that a moment when you feel completely present, and it's just such a delicious thing that you just want to bottle it up. But there's a raccoon that makes its appearance in the first verse, and that raccoon was a remnant of that original prompt with the trash can. So, and I hope that maybe
I remember that. That's like the opening lines, like 1 part alabaster moon,
wow,
right?
You have a
part wrestling,
Kevin.
Something. I remember that line. It's very striking.
Yeah. 1 part alabaster moon, 1 part rustling old raccoon, that old raccoon was the remnant of that original trash prompt. And when I wrote that, I just kept going with that idea, like, oh, this sounds like it's a recipe for something, or a concoction that, and then apothecary, the word apothecary comes into it, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh yeah, it's like kind of, what would this be a recipe for? And then it turned
Yeah.
into, oh, just capturing this moment. Yeah.
So that it's funny, because I think of my process as being very weird, to be honest.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not a model for how to do it because it's weird. But your process, what you're describing, is has some resonance for me. So I trained as a mathematician. That's what I studied in school. I love math. I know that makes me a strange dude, but I love math, and I really enjoy it. I still enjoy math. For me, my creative process is sort of a reductive one. A lot of people they want to throw stuff on a page. I am in search of constraints. That's how I write a song. I need some constraints. And when I get enough constraints, then I deduce the song. It's almost like, it's almost a mathematical process. Almost like, well, then this has to be how, if that's what we're doing, then this has to be how it aligns. And I've never really shared this with people because I just think it seems so strange and different.
Right here, my friends, on Tomes and Tunes, we are getting Kevin's songwriting secrets.
And different from what I hear other songwriters mostly talk about. It's like nobody's talking like I'm talking.
Yeah.
I almost
But
feel
I sort of
guilty about it, like I'm
wonder-
cheating in a way. But this is how I operate, and that's how my brain works. It wants to know within what framework are we going to be creative. Don't
Yeah.
give me a blank piece of paper. So
No,
for
that's
a prompt is actually a great thing for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I kind of wonder if all of us songwriters were to really drill down and reveal this thing for you, mathematics, and I think that when it comes down to it, the reason perhaps why it's so hard to talk about how to write a song sometimes is because we each sort of come to it in the way that's most natural for us. So for me, I after I get those 5 things, it's intuitive. Like, which of these feels like it has the most gravity? What am I most curious about? And so I sort of what are those like metal detectors on the beach? Like, woo, here we go, or like, like, oh, there's some gold over here. And, like with that raccoon, with that example, I had that image of the raccoon wrestling in the trash can, and it was at night because that's when I was growing up, that's when we would put the trash cans out at night because the trash collector would come by early morning before the sun was up. And so I was picturing, this dark mountain forested road that I lived on when I was growing up. And I come to things frequently for myself through like a flash of a photograph or like a scene, and then I try to widen it out and ask, fill in some of the sensory details. And the whole time I'm asking myself, what's going on here? Like, what are these sensory details that I'm feeling? Smells, sight, sound, touch, like how can I build this world in some way? And what is going on in this world? Like, why is it compelling? And what of these details supports that idea? And what of these details really is just irrelevant and should just, end up on the cutting room floor?
Yeah. It's hard to discard an image that is appealing, it's hard to cut it because you feel like, oh, that was nice. It's good. One of the things that I have struggled with at times, I like to write story songs. I write a lot of songs, not all, but I write a lot of story songs. And there's not a lot of space a lot of times in a narrative song for imagery. And if you spend time setting the scene, you're at 6 minutes.
Yeah. Well,
and everybody's falling asleep. You can't get that.
Yeah. You got to get like character and scene and reason. Like, what's the tension or the reason for this? Like, you've got to get that all in.
Yeah.
Really fast at the top. There's another song I wrote recently where I opened with, with the sort of just description of a scene, and I was like, wow, if I keep going with this, we're going to go through the whole first verse and the chorus, and we're not going to have any characters or anything about this song until I get to the second verse. So I was like, okay, second verse, you're in the first verse. First verse, you're going into the second verse slot, and I just switched everything around, and now it feels like, oh yeah, here we are. Like, the characters are introduced, and we know what's happening in this story. So now I can, move forward. Yeah.
So Alan is making an analogy to a painter painting miniatures. That
Is this the one?
that
Yeah.
that creates a challenge of its own, and making that work becomes the task, and then inspires creative effort within that framework. I think he's referencing, what is it, Van Eyck. He and I probably would have gotten along. I don't like a blank canvas, and I guess Van Eyck liked a small one.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be
Don't give me too much
debilitating.
space.
There was in elementary school, I think it was 4th or 5th grade, my art teacher came around, gave us all like an 11 by 17 sheet of paper, something big, and it was blank. Each of us had one, and then he walked around the room and he made 3 marks on each of the pages, different marks, every kid. And from there, it was such a powerful assignment for me, because when I had that blank page in front of me, I was like, I'm not a visual artist. I have never been someone who can just look at that page. My stepdaughter is 17 years old. She's phenomenal. She just looks at a blank page and starts creating stuff, and I'm like, how? But for me, when he brought around and made those marks, then I started to see some shapes and what I could, like, then the marks start to divide up the space, and you start to see relationships between the shapes, and then it becomes something. Yeah, totally get this. Alan, I'm really appreciating these. Oops, whoops, there we go. Who in their right mind would paint a marriage portrait in a 2-inch square? Yeah, the challenge is the inspiration, absolutely. Yeah, and so constraints foster creativity, which this is bringing back to mind this whole past COVID time. A lot of people rebelled against the constraints of having to, work from their home, or whatever additional constraints were all laid upon them this past year. And then some of us actually thrived creatively. We were inspired to create something new from the constraints of that time. Yeah. Kevin, this is such an awesome conversation. I would be so remiss, though, if I didn't ask you the question, which gives this show its name. What have you been reading lately?
Well, I just started reading a book. It just came out called How Stella Learned to Talk. It's a nonfiction book, and it's about a woman named Christina Hunger, who's a speech therapist, and she taught her dog to use a set of buttons that are placed on the floor, and when you push the button, it says a word. And Stella, the dog, can now converse. Converse might be a little too strong, but can definitely express what she's thinking. And so for everybody who thought, I feel like my dog understands everything I'm saying, it turns out pretty much like they know words, and they can identify words, and Stella can put words together in novel ways and describe phenomena that she hasn't seen before in novel ways. It's reminiscent of what Coco, the gorilla, learned to do with sign language, but dogs, of course, can't sign either. So this is a different and so what's interesting is it turns out not having a modality of expression is the limiting factor, not so much the ability to comprehend and have abstract concepts. Just on a very simple level, if Stella wants to go for a walk and that's not convenient, and they explain to Stella that that's not going to happen right now, Stella will run over and push the mad button 4 times. Mad. I mean, she has an understanding
Get
and
the
an
leash.
ability.
Get it now. I'm ready to go.
So it's a very interesting thing. So I've been reading that, and I'm fascinated by it.
The button. Don't ignore me when I'm talking to you.
But I'm also I usually have 2 or 3 books going at a time.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book. I do this sometimes. I'm reading a piece of young adult fiction, and it's called the Firekeeper's Daughter, and it's Angeline Booley is the author's name, and I heard her on NPR, and it was a very interesting conversation. She wrote her first book at age 54 from an idea she had when she was in high school, and she's an indigenous woman from the Ojibwe tribe, and she felt like there was not literature that she could see herself in, and that her
Yeah.
daughter could see herself in. And so she finally decided, after 40 years, I'm going to write this book, and she was able to get it published, and it's actually become kind of a thing. So it made it onto NPR, right? They were discussing her
Yeah.
book and interviewing her, and I was fascinated by it. And I admit to being partly interested just because it is novel subject area. It's about life of people who are indigenous, and also because it's by someone who started very late with a creative pursuit. She worked in HR her whole life and then changed gears, and that's close to home for me. So I thought, well, okay, I'm going to read this book. So
Yeah.
that's
Love
what's
it.
on my nightstand at the moment.
Do you have a passage or a little quote or something like that from either of those that you would be willing to share?
I do. I'm gonna read a little business from How Stella Learned to Talk, and I'll set the scene a little. This is not relevant to the dog. Christina Hunger is a speech therapist, and she has worked previously with autistic people and giving them technological ways of communicate. It turns out that, again, it's actually a similar problem, which is I think what inspired her with the dog. That in her work with young people, she discovered that they were trying to express themselves and could not do so. And so there are devices out there, iPad-based kind of things, that allow you to see a picture, see a word on a screen, touch it, it pronounces the word. And when provided with this modality, it turns out that these people have been trying to communicate, and that explains a lot of their aggressive behavior, is just the frustration.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a passage from early in the book. I crouched down next to Oliver's mother in the crowded waiting room and said, "Has Oliver been saying rice at home at all?" She frowned. And saying, by the way, when she says Oliver saying this, that's her terminology for pushing the button and making the device speak. She frowned. "No, not that I can remember. Why?" "He said it to me this week and last week. Today he was getting pretty upset when I tried figuring out what he meant. Does he eat rice for lunch or dinner?" I said. "I mean, we have it sometimes. I don't think he has any strong feelings towards it." It could mean anything. "Well, I'm sure we'll figure it out. Let me know next week if you hear it at home at all." I said, "Also, before I forget, Oliver discovered the dinosaur page on his device, and he was repeating dinosaur names over and over while we were cleaning up. We ran out of time, but next week I'll bring some dinosaur toys." During the next 3 weeks, Oliver became more and more upset when I responded to rice. He started screaming louder, dug his fingernails into my forearm, desperate for me to understand him. He chucked his device on the ground and even at me several times. Seeing Oliver this upset during our sessions scared me. He was a strong kid. I had no idea what would happen next if this pattern continued. And it was heartbreaking to see this complete shift in his behavior. I almost didn't recognize him anymore. I feared I was losing his trust more and more each week. The following Saturday morning, my first client of the day was a sweet elementary-age girl named Anna. We picked out a book and a game from the shelves and went upstairs to the individual treatment rooms. I said, "This table will be perfect for our book and game. I'm glad we're up here this morning." Anna looked skeptical. She walked around the table and found a small clear bin on the floor. "Miss Christina, what's that?" she asked. "Good question. It's a bin filled with..." Oh my gosh. I jumped out of my chair. "A bin filled with rice," I said. "Look, Miss Christina, dinosaurs in here." She dove her hands through the rice, sorry, to find the rest of the dinosaurs. "This feels nice." Kids with sensory differences often love running their hands through rice. It feels calm and soothing. I shook my head and laughed. This must have been what Oliver was trying to tell me for the past 5 weeks. He wanted to play with a rice bin filled with toy dinosaurs. When Oliver came back to the clinic for therapy on Tuesday, I felt like a little kid trying to keep a secret. I so badly wanted to shout, "I figured it out! I know what you've been asking for! The rice bin with dinosaurs, this whole time!" Just as soon as I saw him. But instead I waited to see if he would ask for it again. Oliver sat down on the swing as usual, tapped his device to turn the screen on, and said, right on schedule, "Rice." Rice. Yes, let's play in the rice, I said. Oliver's eyes followed me as I walked across the gym to pick up the rice bin. By the time I reached the swing, Oliver was shrieking with joy, louder than I had ever heard him yell before. Oliver scooped the rice and threw it in the air and dug for the dinosaurs. I didn't care how messy he was being. He deserved this celebration after he waited 6 months for me to understand him. 6 weeks, sorry. In the 30-minute session, Oliver only paused his ecstatic play once. He took his hand out of the rice and gently squeezed my forearm.
That's a wonderful story. And gosh.
Yeah, and I almost got through it.
You know, communication is so hard for all of us, no matter what. You know, it's so hard to say something in a way that it clearly communicates in the way we want to communicate what we want or need to express to another person in a way that they can hear it. And that's, you know, if you're both fluent in the same language and you both are at the same, you know, ability level with those languages, and, you know, I mean, it's hard anyway. You know, I just think about, you know, how often do we argue with each other? Not you and me, because we've actually never had a conversation before today, but we have never argued.
Well, let's start one now.
But you know, how often we argue with each other, and you know, and then how frustrating it is when, you know, you have some kind of barrier, whether it's just differing levels of ability or language use, or even just cross-generational, you know, the way that language changes cross-culturally.
And how frustrating it is when you can't make your point somehow for whatever reason. How frustrating it can be, and
especially
what a relief when I think that person has now understood me. I mean, that's not something. I think that's just something we've all experienced and felt like, oh, I didn't understand what this person was telling me. I just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Yeah.
And I feel badly that they were so upset.
Yeah.
That because I just didn't know what they meant. We didn't have the same vocabulary. We were speaking at cross purposes. I feel like that is a very real experience in everyone's lives.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's a really touching story. And, you know, here in my home, this is not with people, but with my cat. Someone told me recently that, I haven't done this research myself, but I was told that cats developed a language to talk with us, like when they're just left with cats, when they're feral, they don't communicate in the same way. They don't use the same sounds. But that the domestic cat developed their meows or various, you know, tones or, you know, sounds specifically to communicate with us humans. And so ever since I was told that, I've been paying a little more attention to my cat and how she's communicating. And today she's been communicating that she's very, very hungry. She hasn't eaten ever, which that was the story yesterday too. But seriously, I'm really trying to pay attention to the different tones and duration and just like the ways that she's expressing something, because it's always to express a need, you know, or an emotional state or physical state. Yeah.
I feel like it's the language cats have, the language of masters talking to servants, though. you are not meeting my needs at this moment, and it's not acceptable performance.
I think some cats believe that they're the same as us. They believe they're humans, and then some cats, they have no aspiration to be human. They are cats, and they believe that we're all cats. And that's my cat. We used to have another cat, Scooter, and there was just something about him that felt like he seemed to believe that he was one of us, whereas with the cat that we have now, she seems to believe that we are one of her. I don't know, it's a little bit different, but it feels very different to me. I'm it seems kind of silly to be talking about my cat right here, but it actually does feel different to me. It's interesting. Who knows? Well, I want to share with you that I am reading Toni Morrison's Song
Oh.
of Solomon right now, and I'm reading a few different books that I've been sort of moving around from book to book, in part because I was very, very busy the last couple of weeks, and I felt like I didn't have the attention span. I was very tired at the end of the day. I'd get into bed and read a page and then fall asleep, and I felt like I needed something much with simpler language and easier characters, so I had started Song of Solomon, and then I had sort of moved to some other things. But then last week I went to Big Sur for a couple of days, and I feel like just gazing out at the ocean and, just breathing easy and being off screen, it sort of refocused my attention. So I've been really enjoying this. So I've come back to Song of Solomon, and this is a little passage that I enjoy right from the very beginning. So, I mean, this is page 2. But the situation is that there's a man who has climbed to the top of a building, and he's about to jump. And there are a bunch of people that have gathered on the ground. It's a spectacle. And so this is talking about the people who have gathered. Only the unemployed, the self-employed, and the very young were available, deliberately available because they'd heard about it, or accidentally available because they happened to be walking at that exact moment in the shore end of Not Doctor Street, a name the post office did not recognize. Town maps registered the street as Mains Avenue, but the only colored doctor in the city had lived and died on that street, and when he moved there in 1896, his patients took to calling the street, which none of them lived in or near, Doctor Street. Later, when other Negroes moved there, and when the post service became a popular means of transferring messages among them, envelopes from Louisiana, Virginia, Alabama, and Georgia began to arrive addressed to people at house numbers on Doctor Street. The post office workers returned these envelopes or passed them on to the dead letter office. Then, in 1918, when colored men were being drafted, a few gave their address at the recruitment center as Doctor Street. In that way, the name acquired a quasi-official status, but not for long. Some of the city legislators, whose concern for appropriate names and the maintenance of the city's landmarks was the principal part of their political life, saw to it that, quote, Doctor Street was never used in any capacity. And since they knew that only South Side residents kept it up, they had notices posted in the stores, barbershops, and restaurants in that part of the city, saying that the avenue running northerly and southerly from Shore Road, fronting the lake, to the junction of routes 6 and 2 leading to Pennsylvania, and also running parallel to and between Rutherford Avenue and Broadway, had always been and would always be known as Mains Avenue and not Doctor Street. It was a genuinely clarifying public notice because it gave Southside residents a way to keep their memories alive and please the city legislators as well. They called it not Doctor Street, and were inclined to call the charity hospital at its northern end No Mercy Hospital, since it was 1931, on the day following Mr. Smith's leap from the cupola, and before the first colored expectant mother was allowed to give birth inside its wards and not on its steps. The reason for the hospital's generosity to that particular woman was not the fact that she was the only child of this Negro doctor, for during his entire professional life he had never been granted hospital privileges, and only 2 of his patients were ever admitted to Mercy, both white. Besides, the doctor had been dead a long time by 1931. It must have been Mr. Smith's leap from the roof over their heads that made them admit her. In any case, whether or not the little insurance agent's conviction that he could fly contributed to the place of her delivery, it certainly contributed to its time. So I just love how in that passage she tells us so much about the history of the community, the history of the country really, and the evolution of the town, and she tells us about the dynamic between, the race dynamic there, and she tells us the history of this Doctor Street / not Doctor Street and No Mercy Hospital and Mercy Hospital.
Yeah, and without really ever directly addressing any of that.
Exactly.
It's just in the relating of the events. I find it's an interesting moment in the arts. I have a huge appetite for the content that's coming out from different perspectives. I just find it's fascinating, and I think it's got a huge novelty value because I've just never heard these stories. I've never heard this perspective in the same way. I don't know if you've watched Lovecraft Country on TV. It's a I think it's on HBO. I could be wrong about that, but it's a show told from the standpoint of a black family in Chicago that maintains like a green book kind of a thing, a safe traveling guide. That's not really the gist of the story, and it's got a supernatural element that honestly I could do without, but it has these scenes of the Jim Crow world that these people live in, and it's not the Jim Crow South. I mean, there is the Jim Crow South for sure, but it wasn't just in the South, and it's just harrowing to watch, and you just think, wow. At some level I knew, but I didn't know because I hadn't heard it from these people's perspective. It didn't have the same impact. It's very interesting to me, and I'm so glad that these stories are finally getting told. And Toni Morrison has been telling stories for a long time.
Yeah, it makes a big difference when there's a shift in the on the industry level, on the gatekeeper level of the major publishing and major television and major movie making industries. When I mean, it's so necessary to have diversity all the way through, from the creators all the way up through the decision makers, because if you have a multicultural world of artists, but all the people who are making the decisions about what arts get funding or what arts get made into major motion pictures or major television or end up on the bookshelves, it's like those are the ones that have the ability to amplify those narratives or quash them entirely. Yeah.
And I think the explosion of media options is really a huge driver in that as well. I mean, I grew up with 3 television channels. That's how I grew up. There were 4 channels. One of them was an independent. So there were 3 networks and 1 independent station, and that was it. And we couldn't even really get public TV because it was on the UHF band. And we didn't get any decent reception on that band. So it was really just four options, one of which was all reruns. So there's just so much. I mean, obviously the explosion of content we've seen in the last 40 years is just, it's mind-blowing, really, literally.
Wow, you're making me think too. Gosh, we got to get to the music, but I feel like what I'm thinking right now is that in a way that idea, when there were 3 channels or 10 channels, not 100 or hundreds of channels, there was this unification. Everybody was sort of watching the same thing, especially in any particular region.
Absolutely.
It's like, everybody was watching The Wizard of Oz on Thanksgiving, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so there was this common ground, and of course that was, because it was, just cherry picked. It was really like very few things were actually broadcast. Many narratives were lost, and most narratives were whitewashed. However, on the other side, with the with the diversity of narratives out there, there's little to unify a large country of 300 whatever it is million people. It's like all the fracturing of I mean, it's like it's got this beautiful thing, because now all these narratives are coming alive, and at the same time, perhaps that's one of the challenges. Here's the Burbank Airport's going to keep going overhead. What can I do? As long as I live here, it's just going to keep going. But Kevin, let's get some music. Will you play a song?
Sure.
Yay. I'm going to put myself on mute when you play, so we won't hear any of this air traffic.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Because this song really won't benefit from air traffic. It doesn't really deal with that. So this is a song that was really 30 years in the making. It goes back to when I was dating my wife a long, long time ago, and she started going to contra dances. Now you're from that part of the country, the northeast part of the country. She's from Connecticut. Yeah. So didn't you live in Boston?
I did live in Boston, but more importantly, I lived at a dance and music retreat for a number of summers, a place called Pine Woods, in Plymouth, which is right the last,
Okay.
well, Plymouth Rock, it's kind of famous. But I lived in the backwoods of Plymouth, and it was a folk dance and music retreat, and every night there was different programming throughout the summer, but every night there was contra dancing
Okay.
or English country dancing, or there were some other things. So that was where I learned to contra dance. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you who are listening who are not familiar with contra dancing, it doesn't have anything to do with the contras, the non-contras.
It's not the Iron Contras.
It's like it's a version of, it's similar to square dancing, a little bit similar to English country dancing, and it's very popular in the Northeast, but not just in the Northeast. You see it in other parts of the country as well. In fact, there was a contra dance here in town that we went to a couple times here in LA. But yeah, so dancing is not in my wheelhouse, but my then girlfriend made it clear that she was going to the dance whether I went or not, and so I went. And so I absorbed a lot of things from that experience, and I later wrote a short story about it. I wasn't writing songs at that time, and then, I don't know, 25 years later, I sat down and made that into a song. So it's called Stonington Contra Dance. Oh, I got to turn my keyboard back on. I turned it off so that I wouldn't make a blop
make noise.
in the middle
It
of
doesn't
the...
make noise if it's not on.
That's how it's supposed to sound. All right. Someone has cleared us a path through the snow, exactly one snow shovel wide. Coats on two legs make their way single file through the door on the parking lot side. It's colder in here than outside, we complain, laughing and stamping our feet. The 2 dances in, we'll be down to our t-shirts, the rec center warmed by our body heat. Sarah's collecting the cash for the night to pay for the hall and the band. The young fiddle player is tuning to the ancient piano as well as he can. Let's get things started, a woman calls out. Hurry, we're freezing in here. And when the caller jumps up on the stage, we all let out a cheer. Here at the Stonington Contra Dance, 3rd Friday night of the month, mostly contras and reels, and a square for variety's sake, cherry punch at the break. Novices welcomed with open arms, 'cause we were all novices once. And if you put a foot wrong, well, there's always a chance to get back in step at the Stonington Contra Dance. Sarah's still counting the cash for the night when a straggler appears at the door. A hush fills the hall and everyone comes to a stop where they are on the floor. Hello there, Sarah, the new fella says, with a sorrowful look in his eyes. Welcome back, Willie, is all she can manage in a trembling voice that she can't disguise. Shyly, he asks, could I have the next dance? Like he hadn't been gone 15 years. Like he hadn't left her all alone and confused to cry till she ran out of tears. But seeing the lines and the veins in his face and his worn but neatly pressed clothes, she stands up and smooths out her skirt and says, well, I suppose. And just like so long ago, they're still the best dancers in town. Billy and Sarah, graceful as ever, twirling around and around. Both of them wondering if their broken down hearts can mend. But for now it's enough to be dancing together again here at the Stonington Contra Dance, third Friday night of the month. Mostly contras and reels, and a waltz for romance's sake, homemade cookies at the break. Prodigals welcomed with open arms. Most of us have been prodigals once. And if you put a foot wrong, well, there's always a chance to get back in step at the Stonington Contra Dance. Thank you.
Thank you. Felt like that was like a little journey that I just went on. I could picture it all, and yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
I like that moment in particular where you mentioned the square dancing, and for variety, and the music just went right with it, and the way that the lyric was placed, it was like, oh yeah, this is perfect. It's a little variety right there. I want to say hi to a couple of folks who I didn't see before. Hi, Andre. Nice to see you. And Charlie, so great to see you. Charlie's got a wonderful podcast, Up Close and Acoustic, on PRI, PRX, distributed on NPR. And Jude says beautiful. Jerry Robinson, hello, hello. So thank you all for being here. Oh, Kevin, that was just wonderful. I loved being on that little journey going back to contra dances. I love the fact that I have that imagery. I've been there, and so I could almost feel the hall and everything. Most of the contra dances that I have been to were at that folk dance and music retreat. I went to a few of in the winter every once in a while. Probably 5 at the most. But I danced nightly in the summer times for a number of summers. So it's funny, the very last contra dance I ever went to was actually about 10 or so years ago at Burning Man. And I was just riding around on my bicycle wearing all of my post-apocalyptic Burning Man Black Rock Desert gear, and stumbled upon a contra dance, and I was like, oh, fabulous. And so I just jumped right in, and it was funny. It was, I loved the absurdity of the juxtaposition, and it kind of fit for me too, because I always felt like I was a little bit of an outsider at those contra dances, but then outsiders, as your song says, like, you're always welcome in. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks for letting me share it.
Yeah. I turned my fan on before. I don't know if that's coming through the microphone. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to try a song that you have already heard, because I played it last night at the Fiddler's Crossing.
Great.
This is my week. Charlie emailed me. He asked me if I would do a little recording. Charlie Silvestri, who is here. And so I'm trying to get the song into fighting shape. Is that a term that you can use with a song? Trying to get it working. I played it a few weeks ago on this show. It's called Miracle, and I've been trying to shimmy it into place. I think it's almost there.
So I'm going to shut off my mic, I guess.
Okay. Let me just. This is one thing that you don't have to worry about with piano. It's either in tune or out of tune, and you don't really have much say in it, one way or the other.
Yeah, but it doesn't give you that little moment at the before you, like, nervousness that you can sort of just tune your guitar before you really get launched into the show. It's like, yeah, I just need to play, I guess.
I really wish my nervousness would only last that long, but alas, My brand of stage fright has stamina. It's the long-lasting kind. Let's try this. Okay, so here we go. We'll do this as best we can. New song here. I'll preface this by saying that I wrote this song for a couple of friends, Javi and Tanya, and they were so kind as to support through a Kickstarter campaign that I ran a couple of years ago the making of my new album, 1,000 Tiny Torches, which is now 11 months and 20 days old. And part of their support for the Kickstarter, I said that I would write them a song. And so one day, not too far before COVID, we finally got our schedules coordinated, and we sat down. I went over to their apartment and really just had the most wonderful evening together. And they just told me stories about themselves, and really they wanted a song about their relationship as a couple. And they're very, very different. Javi is very extroverted. Tanya is quite an introvert, and she's got her own podcast in Spanish. They're both from Mexico City. And he works in the entertainment industry here in LA. And so I was trying to capture that in this song, Miracle. Let's see here. Let me see if I can get my fingers working here. Let's talk about nervousness. Here we go. Gonna take me a couple times. Let me do that one more time. Ankle deep in the Pacific, I sink my feet into the foam, looking out on the horizon where the ocean touches the unknown. Hands and knees beside a tide pool, filling buckets for a mold. While my daydreams are drifting by, you've built a castle with a moat. Ooh, I call it a miracle. You call it unpredictable odds. And maybe I'm more Sense and Sensibility. Maybe you're more Star Wars and Disney, spinning the teacups faster and faster. I'm looking up for the belt of Orion, beyond the circle of airplanes flying. You're up on LA Stars award show fashion. Ooh, I call it a miracle. Seems improbable the chances when I think of space and time. We'd even land in the same country. You say, what a lucky roll of dice. Ooh, I call it a miracle. Maybe I'm more Sense and Sensibility. Maybe you're more Star Wars and Disney, spinning the teacups faster and faster. I'm looking out for the belt of Orion, beyond the circle of airplanes flying. You're up on LA Stars award show fashion. Ooh, I call it a miracle. Call it unpredictable odds. Ooh, I call it a miracle. Maybe I'm more Sense and Sensibility. Maybe you're more Star Wars and Disney, spinning the teacups Faster, 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 faster. I'm looking up for the belt of Orion. Beyond the circle of their planes flying. You're up on LA Stars Award Show fashion. Ooh, I call it a miracle. Ooh, I call it a miracle. Oh, so there
Beautiful.
we have that. Thank you.
A lot of your songs I've noticed start with such a strong first line that ankle deep in the Pacific, like I'm right there. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that there's something about first lines. I don't know if I always achieve it, but as I'm working on the song, I come back to that first line and I'm like, is this something that is going to capture someone's attention or bring them into the story or the song or the idea or the feeling? I think that first lines in songs are really important, but in any kind of writing, it's like people's attention, we're asking a lot. I mean, everything is vying for our attention these days. So if we don't capture their attention in an article that we're writing or a story or a book or anything like that, it's like, okay, well, if you don't get it in the first line, you could still get it in the second line or something, but you're already starting to ask a lot if, especially if it's just you with a guitar or us with, our single instruments. It's a different story, I think, when you have a recorded band and you've got the whole production. It's like, oh yeah, well, that electric guitar will take care of that, or that drum fill will take care of that. But it's like when it's just the song, will someone stick around to hear the point of the song? Will they stay with me? And how can I get them there? Yeah, so I try to give some thought to that. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. Well, Kevin, thank you so much. This has been a really lovely way to spend a Thursday afternoon. I'm so glad that we finally got a conversation. I've been enjoying your music so much over the weeks at Fiddler's Crossing, and I was like, let's have a longer conversation. Let's get to know each other a little bit. So this has been really great.
That's been great, and thanks for having me. And I've really enjoyed. I hadn't discovered these until we talked about this, and I started going back through all the archives, and there's so many. I recommend it to people out there if you haven't been watching these. I mean, there's like 50 of them, and they're all very interesting conversations. If you're interested in songs and songwriting and books, and it's very interesting people and great conversation. And you're a great conversation partner. So thanks for having me. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, this has been 56, so 56 episodes of this, and it has been a real gift for me. So, and I'm glad to have you be a part of it. Thank you. All right. Okay, and here we go. I'll say goodbye to you backstage.
All right.
And I will say goodbye to you all here. You get the nice view of my microphone now that the screen has opened up. What can I tell you? Please visit me at that linktr.ee/ArielleSilver, and you can find out more about me. Find out at that same link, I've got all kinds of stuff. My upcoming shows, both live stream, the Tomes and Tunes link is there for next week, and for future weeks, as well as my live shows. Not my shoes. My live shows. I'm playing in Topanga on the summer solstice, so that's next Monday. They're having a music festival in Topanga, and there's going to be music at a lot of the retail shops. So I'll be over at Pebbles at 2 p.m. On Monday. And then there's other stuff there as well. Let's see. Join my mailing list. I would love to have you on board. And right now I am working on my Patreon launch. So if you are someone who enjoys supporting the arts, enjoys supporting these kinds of shows, consider joining my Patreon, supporting the show. Even there's a whole planet theme. So Team Mercury starts, that's at $3 a month, which is less than a latte. It would be a big help though. And so if you're interested in supporting, I welcome you there. And plus you'll get bootlegs and backstories and other goodies, plus patron only live streams. So there's that. What else is over there? Access to my yoga studio. I own a yoga studio. So anyway, that's it. Thank you so much. Next week I have Clementine Volker. She is from the Netherlands, and so she's going to be up in the middle of the night, but it's going to be right here, 2 p.m. Pacific, next Thursday for episode 57. I'm very excited to have that conversation with Clementine. She's a wonderful person, great songwriter. So until we meet again, take good care. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next time.